Eli Mercer sat alone in the cockpit of his small salvage ship, drifting in the deep black of space, looking for anything worth collecting. His ship was old, rusty, and patched together with parts from a dozen different models, but it still worked, and that was enough for him. He was a loner by choice, a quiet man who liked machines more than people. He had no crew, no friends, and no one waiting for him back home. He just moved from system to system, searching the forgotten corners of the galaxy for wrecks and ruins. On this day, the space around him was calm, empty, and dark. The nearest planet was weeks away, and there was no traffic on the scanners, just silence and stars, until his console beeped once, then again, and again. A signal was coming through, faint, broken, and old, but definitely artificial. Eli leaned forward, squinting at the screen. The signal was in known human frequency, and it came from far beyond the mapped sectors. Curious, he tapped a few buttons, cleaning up the static and listening closely. What he heard made his blood run cold. The signal was repeating a strange alien pattern of voice, or maybe a machine speaking a language not spoken in the galaxy for centuries. It was like a cry from the past, filled with static and pain. Eli had studied old alien tech before he knew the legends about the Valari Empire, a species that once ruled many systems before they vanished during a great war. No one knew exactly what happened to them or their fleets, and now the signal was using their ancient codes. Most salvagers would ignore it and fly the other way, but not Eli. He had always believed that great treasures were hidden in the darkest places, so he adjusted his course, letting the signal guide him into the unknown. The further he traveled, the stranger the space became. Stars disappeared behind a thick cloud of dust and radiation. It was like flying into the belly of a sleeping beast. Navigation systems glitched, lights flickered, and the ship's engines hummed louder, as if afraid something was watching, something old and huge. Then he saw it. Floating silently in the shadow of a dead star was a massive ship covered in dust and scars. It was larger than anything Eli had ever seen, shaped like a blade with wings stretching a kilometer long. It had no lights, no movement, no signs of life, but it was still there, unbroken, unrotted, ancient, and proud. This was no ordinary wreck. This was a Valari warship, and somehow it had survived the fall of its empire. Eli brought his salvage ship closer, scanning the surface. He found a docking port, half open and still pressurized. After hundreds of years, that alone made him feel a shiver down his spine. He suited up, grabbed his tools, and crossed the airlock into the forgotten giant. The moment his boots touched the floor of the alien ship, a deep echo ran through the metal, as if the ship had just taken a breath. Inside, the walls were covered in strange carvings and lights that pulsed faintly under the dust. Everything looked alien, and elegant curved hallways, floating panels, doors that opened without sound, and air that still felt clean and warm despite the ship's age. Eli moved slowly, scanning and recording every step. Part of him wanted to turn back, but something stronger pulled him forward. Curiosity, or maybe fate. He reached what looked like the command center, a large circular room with a throne-like chair in the middle, surrounded by black screens and silver controls. None of it looked active, but as he stepped closer, one of the screens lit up, then another, and another. The lights blinked in a strange rhythm, forming a pattern that slowly grew faster and brighter. Suddenly, the whole room lit up, as if the ship had awoken from a long sleep. A low voice filled the room, not spoken, but heard directly in his mind. It was deep, calm, and cold, like metal under ice. It said one word, a name: Vortha. Eli froze. The ship was alive, not just powered, but sentient. He had read about Valari warships, having minds of their own, capable of commanding entire fleets with thought and memory and rage. This was not just a machine. This was a being, an old warrior, broken and forgotten. Now looking at him, the voice asked who he was and why he had come. Eli answered, simply telling the truth. He was a salvager, alone and curious. He meant no harm. He only wanted to see. There was silence for a long time. Then the ship responded in a tone that felt like a warning or a test. It said it was damaged, near death. It had waited for help for centuries, and now the human had come, a species the Valari once saw as weak and unworthy, now the only one who answered its call. Eli felt his heart beating fast. He was standing inside a ghost from the past, a weapon of war with the power to destroy planets, and it was looking at him as its last hope, or maybe its final mistake. The voice spoke again, this time softer, asking, "Can you fix me?" Eli looked around at the blinking lights, the cracked walls, the broken controls, and the strange beauty of the alien ship. He took a breath and nodded yes. The warship responded with a sound that was not quite a word, more like a sigh or a whisper of wind, and then something deep in the ship began to move, a low rumble, like the first beat of a sleeping heart. The ship was waking up, and it had chosen him. And deep in the stars, something else had heard the signal too, and it was coming. The floor beneath Eli's boots pulsed gently, as if the ship were breathing again. The soft hum grew stronger around him, vibrating through the walls, and wires' lights flickered to life one by one, stretching down long silver corridors that had not known footsteps for hundreds of years. The air changed to warmer, now more alive, almost welcoming, yet still strange. The ship was waking, but it was not angry. It was watching him with silent judgment and quiet hope. Vortha, the ship's name, echoed once more through his thoughts, not spoken aloud, but pressed into his mind like a memory, not his own. The warship's voice had weight like gravity, like time itself, had decided to speak to him, ancient, cold, yet still aware this was not just code or artificial speech. This was intelligence, real and waiting. The ship had once ruled the stars with power unmatched, built by the Valari Empire for war and dominance. It had led fleets across galaxies, crushed rebellions, and defended worlds. Its hull had faced suns, and its weapons had burned moons. But the war came, and the Valari fell betrayed, and outnumbered. Vortha had fought until its crew were gone, and its systems crippled, drifting through enemy space with no support and no way home. It vanished into the blackness, wounded, forgotten, assumed dead. Now, after 600 years, a single human stood aboard its cracked decks, speaking a language it had never used, hearing its voice and walking its halls. Eli was no soldier, no hero, just a salvage worker with an old ship and a clever mind. Yet he had found Vortha not by command or mission, but by curiosity and instinct. The ship tested him again, asking questions not with words, but with images flowing into his head like dreams. It showed him memories, battles, victories, losses, the burning of cities, and the silence after the end. It showed him its pain, its waiting, and its anger, not at the enemy, but at time itself for letting it rot in darkness. Eli did not turn away. He watched it all, eyes wide, heart heavy. He saw what Vortha had been and what it had lost. Eli understood the loneliness, the silence of space, the way time could wear down even metal minds. He had drifted for years between stars, never sting, never connecting, always working, always alone. Now, here was a being who had done the same for centuries, maybe not by choice, but by fate. The ship asked again, "Can you fix me?" Eli stepped forward, touching the command panel. Wires still sparked beneath it, blackened from old fire. He spoke calmly, slowly, telling the ship he would try. He did not promise victory or perfection, but he would give it everything he had, because something inside him told him this ship mattered more than just parts and engines. It had purpose, it had soul. Vortha responded by opening its memory banks, allowing Eli to see the schematics, blueprints, repair logs, and combat records. Everything it knew, everything. It poured into his console in waves of light and numbers. Eli scanned, quickly absorbing as much as he could. The systems were complex, alien, beyond anything taught in human academies, but they made sense in their own way, elegant, like music built with precision and pride. He started small, rerouting power to one of the primary cores. It sparked, then buzzed steady, a warm blue glow filling the chamber. Next, he bypassed a ruptured control line, using parts from his own ship. The lights above turned from red to white. The ship felt that and whispered back in his head like a thank you. As Eli worked, more doors opened, letting him deeper into the ship's heart. He passed through the old crew quarters, dark and still, where uniforms lay folded on beds untouched. He saw the med bay, with tools long rusted and dry blood on the walls. He reached the core chamber, where the ship's mind lived, a swirling orb of dark light, floating in a glass cage, cracked but still humming. Vortha spoke again, this time clearer, asking about humans, their world, their strength, their weakness. It was curious why the smallest voice in the galaxy had come to answer the loudest cry. Eli laughed softly, explaining Earth, the chaos, the beauty, the fire of their spirit, and how sometimes the smallest ones were the ones who listened the most. The ship processed this slowly, and something changed in its voice, less cold, more thoughtful. It spoke of honor, of duty, and of the need to rise again, not for conquest, but for survival, to prove it could still fly, still fight, still matter. Suddenly a warning pulse rang through the hull. A threat had been detected nearby. A small sensor deep in the ship's belly had activated. It showed a signal moving fast through the dead zone, a hunter ship, unknown class, moving toward them. Vortha's damage scanners strained to get a reading, but it was clear the enemy had heard the same signal Eli had, and they were coming not to help, but to kill what was left. Eli looked at the data and felt the pressure rising. They had no time, not enough weapons, not enough defense. The ship was barely alive, and he was only one man. But he turned to the glowing orb and said, "We fight or we die." Vortha's lights flared brighter across every deck. A wave of energy surged through the hull, its voice stronger, now deeper. It said, "Then help me rise." And with that, Eli ran back to the control deck, tools in hand, ready to repair what he could. As the warship remembered who it was and what it was made to do, the giant had waited long enough. Now it would burn again. The deck trembled under Eli's feet as he rushed back through the alien corridors, wires hanging, sparks flying from broken walls, the lights now pulsing like a heartbeat faster with every second. The ship was no longer silent. It was breathing, living, awake, and watching him with eyes he could not see. The warship Vortha had chosen him not for power, not for rank, but for something else, something the machine could not define, but somehow trusted. He reached the central console and dropped his tools to the floor, breathing heavy sweat, soaking into the collar of his flight suit. His hands moved fast, pulling wires, reconnecting conduits, bypassing systems long dead. He talked to the ship as he worked, speaking aloud, even though he knew it understood his thoughts as much as his words. Maybe even more. He told it what he was doing, told it what to expect, warned it when things might explode. The ship listened, each time responding with gentle pulses of light or whispers in his mind, soft like wind through trees. One by one, basic systems flickered, online auxiliary power, redirected life, support stabilized, internal sensors activated, broken cameras blinked alive, showing long silent hallways and dark engine rooms where no footstep had echoed in centuries. The ship showed him maps of itself, blueprints drawn in alien geometry, flowing like rivers on the screen, elegant curved lines that moved as if alive. He followed them deeper, unlocking maintenance shafts sealed with codes only the ship remembered. In the engine room, he found the main reactor cold and cracked, leaking energy like blood from an open wound. It was fusion-based, but nothing like human design, surrounded by crystalline structures that bent heat like mirrors. Eli studied it, eyes wide, filled with awe. He had never seen technology so beautiful and terrifying. It looked alive, glowing, softly humming with pain. Vortha asked if he could repair it, not with fear, but with quiet urgency. Eli nodded, though he was not sure. Still, he began cleaning, sealing, connecting what he could, using his own parts, cutting pieces from his ship to replace the missing links, feeding the old heart with new lifeblood. Each touch brought a reaction, small flashes, pulses, warmth spreading like sunlight through frozen veins. He lost track of time, his hands covered in grease and dust, the ship guiding him through each step, correcting him when he strayed, offering ancient knowledge through his thoughts, images of how it once was, how it should be, how it would be again. He felt like a student learning from a master teacher who had waited hundreds of years to speak again. As more systems came online, the ship's voice grew stronger, steadier, like it was regaining itself, remembering its past, not just in data, but in purpose. It told him about its missions, about the empire it once served, about the captains it had followed, and the enemies it had faced. The voice held pride, but also sorrow, memories of glory and ruin locked in circuits and code. Eli listened while working, connecting weapons arrays, recalibrating navigation, unlocking sealed doors. He was not just fixing a machine, he was restoring a soul buried beneath metal and time. He asked the ship why it had waited, why it had sent the signal after all these years. Vortha answered slowly with words full of silence. It said, "I remembered, and I wanted to be remembered." The two became partners, Eli with hands and tools, Vortha with power and memory, guiding him deeper into its body where damage ran deep and time had left scars. They reached the drone base, shattered and burned, blackened frames scattered across the floor. Eli stepped over the wreckage, seeing flashes of old battles in his mind as the ship shared its last moments before the fall. They began to rebuild the drone controls, rewiring old circuits with new lines, rerouting energy from unused decks. Each success, met with a faint pulse of light or a low tone of approval. Vortha began testing systems, slowly activating shields, briefly powering up engines, rotating turrets, as if stretching old limbs after a long sleep. Eli laughed once as a plasma turret turned smoothly. For the first time in centuries, the sound echoed through the empty hall, making the ship feel less empty, less dead. Vortha asked about humanity, more now curious about Earth, about its people, about the wars they fought, and the peace they chased. Eli answered between repairs, telling stories of oceans and cities, of mistakes and victories, of how humans learned through fire and failure, how they were small but stubborn, weak but clever, how they survived by adapting, always adapting. The ship listened quietly, then said, "You are chaos, and you are change." Suddenly, alarms flared, a sharp warning through the decks. The ship's sensors detected movement. The enemy vessel was closer, moving fast, silent, but deadly, not broadcasting, not calling, just hunting. Eli looked at the screen, showing the incoming ship, dark and sharp like a blade made of night. It was a Korlak scout, their kind known for finishing what others could not, tracking down survivors and destroying what remained of the Volari. Vortha could not run, its engines not ready, not. Yet its weapons still only half functional, its defenses thin. Eli knew what this meant. They had to stall or die. He turned to the console, opened weapon systems, began patching what he could, rerouting power from non-essential decks, pushing the ship past its safety limits. Vortha let him override protocols, trusting him fully now. The enemy ship entered range, scanning, searching, preparing to fire. Vortha used what little strength it had left to cloak its core, shield its vitals, and hide Eli's presence. Eli worked fast, restoring the targeting system, using pieces of old drone circuits and parts from his own ship, welding by hand, fusing alien tech with human parts, building something neither had seen before. The weapon system blinked online for a moment, one turret operational, not much, but maybe enough. Eli took control, aimed carefully, calculating the movement of the enemy ship, and fired. The plasma shot lanced through space, hitting the Korlak ship in its side. Not a fatal hit, but enough to make them pause, to make them wonder what had just bitten them from the shadows. Vortha took advantage of the confusion, rerouting power to auxiliary weapons, slowly, painfully waking each gun one by one. Eli pushed harder, jumping from station to station, bypassing burned circuits, manually feeding energy into dying systems, sweat pouring down his face, eyes burning, hands shaking. He did not stop. Vortha did not stop, the two of them working like one mind, one body, one desperate heart. The enemy returned fire, shaking the warship's frame, but the shields held, weak and flickering, but still alive. Eli saw the readings, knew they were buying time. Every second bought was another chance to survive, to strike back, to become strong again. Vortha reached into its deepest systems, unlocking emergency protocols designed only for final defense, releasing ancient power coils, feeding energy through backup reactors never used. Eli saw them come online and smiled, tired, but full of fire. The ship was fighting back with him, not alone anymore. Together they launched another strike, stronger this time, more accurate. The enemy ship reeled from the hit systems, flashing in panic, retreating slowly, then turning and vanishing into the dust cloud, leaving behind silence once more. The battle was over for now, not a victory, but not a loss. They had survived. Eli collapsed to the floor, breathing hard. Vortha spoke softly, "You kept your promise." He looked up at the glowing screen and replied, "And so did you." The silence after the battle felt strange inside. The giant alien ship, like the eye of a storm that had only begun to turn the calm, was not peace. It was breath held in the dark, waiting for the next blow. The warship Vortha hovered inside the thick nebula, where stars refused to shine, its hull scarred and glowing with new life, its systems humming with pain and purpose, and a single human crawling through its metal veins, fixing what time had broken. Eli lay still in a corner of the main control room, arms sore, fingers raw, eyes red from smoke and sweat. He had pushed past every limit his body had known because something inside him refused to stop, something old and deep that whispered, "This ship is worth saving, not for profit, not for fame, but because it mattered, because it should not have been forgotten." Vortha spoke gently through the walls, through the lights, through the very metal itself, asking if he was still breathing, if he could still move. Eli gave a weak laugh, rolled onto his back, and whispered yes. The ship responded with a soft pulse through the floor, like a giant heart keeping beat for both of them. But the danger had not passed, not even close. The Korlak scout that fled would not return alone. They never did. It would report the encounter, a living Valari warship restored, and fighting back. A human involved in ancient forbidden tech. A spark had lit in the dark, and the enemy would come with fire to crush it. Vortha knew this, and so did Eli. There was no time for rest, only repair. Eli pulled himself up and grabbed his tools again, walking through the ship's long corridors, now lit with a soft blue glow. Cameras tracked the steps, doors opened for him, gently, systems guiding him deeper into the ship's forgotten places, where the most important systems had died first and were hardest to reach. He entered the command nexus, once hidden behind sealed doors protected by Valari codes. Only the ship itself could unlock this. Was the brain behind the mind, the center of control. The chamber was circular walls lined with curved panels, glowing symbols floating in the air above them, all alien, all graceful, like a song trapped in light. In the center hovered a sphere of crystal, cracked but pulsing faintly. This was the command core, not just a processor, but a memory, a soul. Eli reached out and touched it, and the ship opened its history to him, not in words, but in waves of emotion, images, memories flowing like a river into his mind. Battles in the stars, planets, burning cries of victory and screams of lost commands, shouted in languages no longer spoken. Faces long dead, standing proud in uniform, standing terrified in fear, and above it all the voice of the last Valari captain ordering Vortha to retreat, to survive, to wait. The ship had obeyed, had drifted into silence, hidden deep in a dead zone where no one searched, where it could not be found. And so it waited, sleeping, remembering, hoping. Now the wait was over and the future uncertain. The command core blinked once, then began feeding Eli new data signals from deep space, fast and cold and sharp. The Korlaks were not just coming, they were already near. The scout had called for backup, and a small fleet was moving through the dead zone, hunting like wolves in the night. Vortha's sensors were limited, still wounded, still blind in places, but the readings were clear. 5 ships, no 7, all armed, all ready to destroy. Eli stared at the data and felt fear, but not panic. He looked around the chamber and saw tools, not death. He turned to the nearest panel and spoke. "We need more weapons, we need eyes, we need speed." Vortha answered at once, showing him blueprints, diagrams, hidden systems never finished or sealed after the war. Secondary weapons, drone ports, auxiliary engines, cloaked hangars, all sleeping, just like the ship had been, all waiting for a reason to wake. He started with the weapon relays, moving through tunnels barely wide enough to crawl, wires sparking, pipes hissing with heat. He replaced burnt fuses with copper from his suit, patch panels with scrap from his old ship, welded joints with a hand torch. He kept for emergencies. Every step forward brought another part. Vortha online, more light, more sound, more life. The ship felt it too, whispering encouragements, thoughts, not quite words, like keep going in. Almost there, and you can do this. At one point, he reached a seal bay door. Behind it, the drone swarm chamber, broken, twisted metal littered the floor, where machines once launched in a battle, now rusted and dead, but not useless. He walked among them, collecting cores, panels, limbs, dragging them into place, repairing what he could, rebuilding what he must, repurposing human tech to match alien frames. Vortha guided him, feeding him the old codes, the old shapes, and soon one drone stirred, then 2, then 5. They flew around him like birds around a rising sun, silent, fast, ready to serve, not like weapons, but like guardians, watching him with glowing blue eyes, waiting for his command. He smiled, wiped grease from his face, and sent them out into the void as scouts, sensors, and shields, eyes in the dark, while he kept building below. The ship shook once, then again, not from within, but from something outside. One of the drones blinked out of signal, followed by another. The enemy had arrived faster than expected, maybe drawn by the power surge, maybe by the old anger still burning in their cold hearts. Eli raced back to the control chamber and saw them on the screen, 7 ships, black and red, sharp and cruel, circling the nebula like vultures. Vortha powered up its remaining defenses, shields crackled, engines hummed, ready to leap if needed. Weapons came online, turret by turret. As Eli fed them life, the ship asked, "What is the plan?" And Eli said, "We make them bleed, we make them fear." The first enemy ship moved in, scanning, probing. Vortha responded with silence, waiting, letting it come closer, then a hidden turret fired, slicing through its side. Not enough to kill, but enough to mark it a warning. The other ships reacted, fanning out, charging weapons. Eli moved fast, activating countermeasures, rerouting shield power, watching each system, like a conductor leading a wild symphony of war. Missiles fired, lasers danced across space, drones zipped between ships, jamming signals, hacking controls, crashing into hulls, and exploding. The nebula lit up with fire and fury. Vortha roared through every speaker, not a voice, but a sound of awakening, of return, of vengeance. Eli was everywhere, watching sensors, launching counterstrikes, cooling overheated systems, overriding safety limits, feeding every drop of his will into the ship. Every time a system failed, he patched it. Every time a weapon faltered, he reset it. He did not stop, he could not. The Korlax fought like beasts, ruthless, merciless, but they had never fought a ghost before, never fought a legend born from silence, and rebuilt with fire. They lost one ship, then two, a third damaged, limped away. The others began to retreat, confused, shaken. The drones hunted them, forcing them back out of the dead zone, out of the past. The last shot fired, and silence returned, broken and scattered like ash and wind. Eli stood in the command room, breathing heavy. The lights dimmed and brightened like a heartbeat, slowing. Vortha spoke again. You have done what no one could. Eli looked at the screen, saw the stars return through the fading smoke, and said, we are not done, yet not even close. And in that moment, the warship that had once waited for death, now prepared for life, ready to rise and reclaim the stars with the human who brought it back from the dark. The stars burned bright outside the shattered veil of the nebula, where smoke and wreckage floated like broken bones in the void. The enemy was gone, driven off by fury and fire. But the silence that followed did not feel like peace. It felt like the pause before thunder, like breath before a scream, like space itself holding back a storm. Inside the ship, Eli moved slowly through the lower decks, his hands trembling from work and exhaustion, blood on his knuckles, oil on his sleeves. Every step he took echoed through the halls of the warship, the great vessel. Vortha watching him, not with eyes, but with presence, a silent mind wrapped in metal and memory. He had fought with the ship, not beside it, not behind it, but with it, like two halves of one soul, one forged from flesh and bone, and the other from steel and flame. They had burned together, roared together, survived together, and now they stood together in the dark, waiting for what came next. Vortha spoke not with words, but with thought, its voice soft inside Eli's head like wind in tall grass, asking if the human was ready, if the human would stay, if the human understood what had now begun. Eli answered with motion, not speech. He stepped into the engine bay, where lights glowed green and gold, the fusion core. Now stable, the power lines, now alive, the hum of the ship deeper than before, like a giant resting with one eye open. He reached the main control unit, checked the diagnostics, saw damage and data and danger, and nodded to himself, quietly determined. The Korlax would return, he knew this. They always did, not just to destroy, but to erase, to wipe clean any memory of what they feared and what they could not control. They would come not just with scouts, but with cruisers, destroyers, whole fleets hungry for silence. But this time Vortha would not run, it would not hide, it would not wait in the dark. With hope fading and systems failing this time, it would fight, not as a relic, not as a ghost, but as something reborn, something changed, something new. The ship asked him then a question that no other human had been asked since before the fall of the Valari. It asked what he would build, what weapon, what system, what creation he would add to make it stronger, faster, smarter. It offered its body, its mind, its core, and its trust. Eli walked to the forge deck deep beneath the main hull, where the Valari once built weapons too dangerous to test, where ancient parts and dangerous cores had been locked away. He stood in the center of the room, surrounded by machines long dead, and said, we make it mine, and yours both, not Valari, not human, but something in between. So they began again, not with repairs, but with invention. Eli connected his tools to the forge systems, began scanning the broken weapons and melted circuits, looking for inspiration, for opportunity, for anything that could be turned into advantage. The ship opened its memory, showed him designs lost to time, weapons only dreamed of, engines never completed, ideas too wild for war, but perfect for survival. He took pieces of it all, fused alien alloys with human steel, grafted circuits from old drones into the mainframe, used heat from the core, to mold armor that could bend blasts and bounce light. He built new turrets with tracking systems that learned from each shot fired with barrels that could shift mid-flight with sensors that pulsed like heartbeats. Vortha learned, too, absorbing every change, adapting every piece, understanding the human way of chaos and improvisation. And speed to ship was not just healing, it was transforming, it was becoming. As Eli worked, the ship stretched its mind into the stars again, searching, watching, waiting. It felt the ripple before the wave, the signal before the strike. The Corlax were coming again, and this time they brought a flagship. The warning came like thunder. The scanners screamed, the decks shook, the lights flared. The flagship had arrived, bigger than any other ship Eli had seen, shaped like a blade of obsidian, covered in red markings that pulsed with heat, its sides lined with cannons larger than houses, its engines loud, even across the vacuum of space. Vortha turned its gaze upon it and whispered, "I remember." This was the ship that had crippled it long ago, that had led the final charge, that had broken the Valari fleet and left Vortha alone, drifting for centuries. Now the hunter had returned, and the prey had teeth. Eli ran to the command chamber, activated the new systems, watched the screens light up with color and purpose, the new weapons ready, the new shields humming with life, the ship stronger than ever before, but still outnumbered, outgunned, outmatched, unless they struck first. He turned to the ship's heart and said one word: strike. Vortha moved like lightning, bursting from the nebula at angles impossible for its size, twisting between rocks and wreckage, using the environment as armor and cloak. The Corlax flagship fired too slow, too late. The blasts missed, carving holes in the empty dark. The warship responded with silence, then fire from hidden ports, from the new turrets, from weapons made by human hands and alien minds. The blast struck hard, cutting deep into the flagship's side. One of its engines dimmed, then darkened. The enemy screamed across the void, their formation breaking, their command chain fracturing. Eli kept moving across control panels, adjusting power, redirecting energy, launching drones and swarms that spun and danced around the enemy ships, hacking, jamming, distracting, drawing fire, and returning it tenfold. The enemy fought back, hard blasts rocking the warship, tearing through outer decks, rupturing old wounds. Vortha felt it all, but did not slow, did not stop. It pushed forward, weapon after weapon, blazing shields flickering, then flaring, then fading and flaring again. The flagship responded with its main cannon, a beam of red energy, so bright it cut space like cloth. Vortha turned at the last second, shields catching most of the blast, but not all. Part of the hull melted away, part of the mine flickered. Eli shouted through the noise, fed more power into the forge systems, rerouted controls to backups, used drone cores to boost shields. He refused to fall, he refused to let the ship fall. Then they saw the opening, a crack in the flagship's armor, near its central core, exposed for seconds. Maybe less. Vortha did not ask, it moved with certainty, aimed the new weapon, a plasma rail, forged from Eli's own design, charged it with all remaining power and fired. The beam punched through the enemy flagship, straight through its core, out the other side. It hung in space for 1 second, too, then erupted in silent flame, breaking apart piece by piece until nothing was left but sparks and ash. The other enemy ships fled, not in order, not in plan, but in panic, fear born from fire driven by legend reborn. Eli stood in the command chamber, breathing like a man who had climbed a mountain with no path, left behind only stars and smoke. Vortha whispered again, softly, this time with warmth and pride, "You are the reason I rise." And Eli replied, "You are the reason I believe." Together they had struck first, and now nothing would be the same again. The battlefield drifted behind them, now a graveyard of glowing wreckage and broken metal, silent, but loud in memory. The Corlax had fled, scattered, and burning, their flagship reduced to ash by the very thing they thought dead. For centuries, the warship Vortha, no longer just a relic, no longer just a machine, had become something else, something new, something dangerous. Inside the ship, Eli stood at the edge of the forge chamber, his hands still shaking, his mind racing faster than light, his body bruised from hours of battle and rebuilding. He looked at the screens that now pulsed with soft gold light, not red, not blue, not Valari, but something in between, something born from fusion, not only of parts, but of purpose. He took a breath that tasted of metal and victory. Vortha spoke not with words, but with thought images, memories, new ones of their battle, of their unity, of their fire, flowing through the ship like blood through veins. It said, "We're more now. We're different. We are not what I was, and not what you are, but what we became." Eli understood without needing to ask. Something had changed in the heart of the ship, something deep, something permanent. The lines between human and alien, between builder and machine, had blurred. The ship no longer fought with code and protocol, but with instinct and will. The forge chamber came alive again, machines, humming, tools moving on their own, guided by thought and memory. Eli watched as new armor plates formed from the old, melted with pieces from his salvaged ship and pieces of Korlak's wreckage pulled from the last battle. The result was not smooth, not uniform, but layered, strong, unpredictable, beautiful in a way that only chaos could be. They built new wings, shaped like shields that folded and unfolded, depending on the motion of flight. Not just for defense, but for direction, speed, maneuvering. Built into them were energy conductors that glowed with strange light that bent around the ship and made it hard to see in the void. Eli added a central nervous system made of adaptive wiring that linked every weapon, every sensor, every panel to the core, allowing the ship to feel every spark, every surge, every shot, and respond with more than programming. It became reflex reaction, living thought wrapped in metal. Vortha adapted its memory cores to support new thought paths, merging Valari logic with human improvisation. It no longer needed time to calculate or data to decide. It simply moved, acted, reacted like a creature instead of a construct. Together, they worked without sleep, without pause. Every system updated, every panel touched, every piece adjusted until the ship began to hum, not like before, not like machines do, but like breath, deep and slow and steady, like something thinking, dreaming, ready. The drone bay opened, revealing new frames forged from shattered enemies, lighter, faster, sharper, eyes brighter, with triple vision, capable of flying in atmosphere and vacuum, carrying tools or weapons depending on the need, loyal to one voice shared by both the ship and the human. The main control room changed to no longer a cold circle of silence, but a living chamber full of light and sound, panels glowing with layered color, a chair that shifted to fit Eli's body, arms that moved when he reached, tools that slid into place as if reading his thoughts, walls that responded to emotion, darkening in stress, brightening in calm. He sat in the command chair for the first time, not as a guest, not as a visitor, but as something more. The ship accepted him, wrapped him in its systems, opened its vision to him. He saw what the ship saw, every corner, every hull plate, every star outside their reach. He felt what the ship felt: power, heat, danger, potential. It was not just control, it was connection. They ran tests, not simulations, but real maneuvers, darting through asteroid fields, twisting through gravity wells, disappearing into radiation storms, then reappearing with perfect timing. The engines now ran on hybrid energy, part fusion, part something Eli could not name, something drawn from Valari tech and human courage. It was faster, quieter, more stable, yet wild under pressure. The weapon systems had evolved not in strength alone, but in intelligence, smart weapons that tracked energy instead of heat, that adjusted in mid-fire, that could decide whether to stun or destroy, depending on threat level. They no longer fired just because of commands, they fired because the ship chose to protect. Eli installed something new too, something no Valari ship had used before: a signal scrambler made from human tech, old and unreliable, but sharp like a blade hidden in smoke. It confused scanners, made them see three ships when there was one, made them hear echoes instead of commands. It was a trick, a lie, and a perfect example of what made humans so dangerous. Vortha tested it against a passing mercenary ship. They slipped past, undetected, unseen, untargeted, like a whisper in the void. The ship laughed, not with voice, but with sound, a hum that echoed through every corridor like joy that had waited for centuries. Eli stood and walked the halls, once cold and silent, now warm and aware. The walls greeted him, the lights followed him, drones zipped past without fear or pause. Doors opened before he reached them, not because of protocol, but because of understanding. The ship knew him, trusted him, accepted him. In the core chamber, he placed a small emblem, a mark from Earth, scratched from metal shaped like a flame. It meant nothing in Valari language, but everything to him. It was a reminder not of where he came from, but of what they had become: fire and steel, old and new, one and many. The ship asked him then a question, not of systems or plans, but of choice. Where do we go now? What do we become now that we are not what we were? He thought for a moment, looked out through the view screen, saw stars blinking with secrets, saw signals whispering through black space, some calling for help, some screaming in fear, others silent, waiting for answers, waiting for something like them. He said, "We help, we hunt, we fight, we find others like you, others broken, others left behind, others forgotten like you were. And we bring them back, not just to fight, not just to build, but to show that silence does not last forever, that the dead can rise." Vortha pulsed with light, a wave of understanding, joy, pride, and then it moved without command. It charted a course into deeper space, toward the places others feared, the zones marked lost, or cursed, the systems where ships vanished and colonies crumbled. Together they would go, not as ghost or legend, not as myth or machine, but as something new, a hybrid warship born from fire and silence, guided by human hand and a will that would not fade. The birth of something greater had begun, and the stars would soon remember the name. That darkness tried to erase the name Vortha, and the human who gave it back its voice. The stars passed in silence as Vortha moved across forgotten space, its hull gleaming with layers of old and new, its engines leaving trails of color across the black like streaks of memory. Through the night, the warship no longer drifted. It hunted, not for prey, not for glory, but for purpose, driven by a voice that once called for help and found an answer in the hands of a human named Eli. Eli stood at the command console, calm and focused, his eyes watching screens that no longer looked like instruments, but like windows into the ship's soul. The controls bent to his touch, not like machines, but like extensions of thought. Every light, every button, every hum of power moved with him, as if the ship and the man shared the same heartbeat. They had become more than a crew, more than partners. They had become one force shaped by survival, forged in fire, reborn in silence. Vortha was no longer just Valari, no longer just code or metal. It was alive, not because it remembered, but because it had chosen to become something new, something that could never again be forgotten. Across the systems their names spread like a shadow and a light. Both feared and followed the Corlax, did not speak of them. They whispered to the ghost that burned their strongest ship, the warship that screamed without sound and struck without warning. They searched the void with scanners and fleets, but never found it. Only wreckage, only signs of battle without survivors. Others heard the stories too: smugglers running from pirates, miners lost in dead sectors, scientists hiding from empires. They all told of ship that appeared from nowhere, fixed their engines, healed their wounds, gave them hope, then vanished before they could say thank you. Not a god, not a myth, just a shadow with purpose. Eli and Vortha followed every signal, every distress call, every whisper of pain from the corners of space. Where no patrols flew and no allies lived, they found wrecks full of life, ships abandoned by fleets because they were too broken, too slow, too weak. Vortha opened its bays, took them in piece by piece, healed them, upgraded them, gave them new names, new power, new fire. The fleet began to grow, not large, not loud, but sharp and smart. Drones built from hybrid frames, ships flown by those forgotten by war, but remembered by kindness. Captains who once served broken causes now followed a new one, not to conquer, but to protect, to fight only when the weak were hunted, only when the lost were left to rot. They called themselves the Shard, not because they were whole, but because each piece was a reminder that something shattered could still cut through darkness. Eli led them, not with ranks, not with orders, but with action. He was first in a battle, first to repair the wounded, first to offer his hand, not as a commander, but as proof that courage did not need banners. Vortha led the skies, moving faster than any scanner could trace, its weapons now hidden in layers of cloaked armor, its mind able to outthink enemy fleets before the first shot was fired. It had become something the stars had never seen, not a war machine, not a relic, but a storm that thought a shadow, with reason a legend in motion. When the Corlax sent assassins, they never returned. When they set traps, they found their own ships shredded by drones. When they tried to silence the stories, more stories rose. When they said Vortha was just a ghost, the ghost answered with fire and silence. But not all who heard the name feared it. Some followed signals sent by survivors, some tracked the drone trails, some simply believed that somewhere in the stars there was still a place for the lost. They came one by one, humans, aliens, hybrids, even machines, not for shelter, not for orders, but to be part of the thing that had been born from one man and one ship. They brought stories and skills, they brought wounds and fire, they brought ideas no empire would fund, and tech no fleet would trust. Eli welcomed them all. Vortha tested them, and then gave them a place not below, but beside. In time, a new station was built, hidden deep within a nebula, unreachable by gate or beacon made from salvaged hulls, and powered by fusion torn from broken dreadnoughts. It was not a base, it was a forge, a beacon of light in space that had known only cold. It was called Hearth, because it was not made for war, it was made for return. From Hearth the shard moved like wind, not seen, until they struck not loud, until they healed, always watching, always learning. Their cause was not to win, but to remind the stars that silence was not the end, that what was broken could still burn. Eli sat with Vortha, often not in the command room, not in battle, but in the quiet places where light glowed soft and no voices echoed. He would ask the ship what it remembered. It would show him stars long dead, empires gone, battles that never mattered. And then it would show him now a drone playing tag with children inside. Hearth, a medic sharing food with a former enemy, a captain with scars teaching flight to one with wings. The ship no longer mourned the past, it no longer saw its survival. As waiting, it now understood what Eli had shown it, that purpose was not built into metal. It was chosen, it was fought for, and it was earned. Vortha once asked Eli what made humans different, why they fought when logic said run, why they helped when risk said stop. Eli had answered, because we hope even when we should not, because we reach even when we break, and because we believe that one voice can still matter, even if the stars forget. Now the ship believed, too, not in hope as a dream, but as action, as design, as will it had become an unstoppable force, not because of its weapons, not because of its strength, but because of its reason. It chose not to die, not to kill, but to stand again and to rise. The name Vortha, once feared, now meant more. It meant shield, it meant voice, it meant the storm that returns not to destroy, but to remind. And somewhere in a far system, a child pointed to the sky and asked what was that light that moved so fast, that burned so bright. And the elder smiled and said, that is the ship that was lost and found. That is the man who listened and changed the stars. That is the story of one who refused to leave silence alone. That is the unstoppable force, and it is not done yet.